A bullet shattered Benjamin Cross's office window as Elizabeth Bricks slammed into him, sending them crashing to the floor. Her trembling hand pressed against his chest, brown eyes intense with secrets. "Stay down," she whispered. By morning, she had vanished, leaving only blood on his shirt and a burning need to find her. Benjamin Cross lay motionless on the cold marble floor of his 40th floor office, the weight of her absence already crushing his chest more than her body ever had. Elizabeth Bricks' blood, warm, crimson, achingly real, stained his white dress shirt where she had pressed against him. The sirens grew louder, climbing through the Manhattan night like mechanical screams, but all Benjamin could hear was the echo of her whispered words, "Stay down." Who was she? The question burned through his mind as he stared at the shattered window where death had tried to find him. How did she know the assassin was coming? Why had she risked everything to save a man she had never met? 3 blocks away, Elizabeth Brick moved through the shadows like smoke, discarding her cleaning uniform piece by piece. Her shoulder throbbed where the assassin's second shot had grazed her, but she ignored the pain. Pain was temporary. Exposure was fatal. Her encrypted phone buzzed against her ribs. Monica Santos, her handler, her only family in a world where family was a luxury she could not afford. "Package compromised," Elizabeth whispered into the device, pressing herself against a brick wall as police cars screamed past. "Extraction in 30. What happened?" Monica's voice carried the weight of 20 years in the shadow organization that had raised Elizabeth from a broken 15-year-old girl into the most lethal protective asset they had ever created. "I broke protocol." The words tasted like betrayal on Elizabeth's tongue. "The target, I couldn't let him die." Silence stretched across the encrypted line, and Elizabeth closed her eyes, knowing what that silence meant. She had compromised everything for a man whose blue eyes held the same haunted pain she saw in her mirror every morning. Back in his office, Benjamin refused the paramedics who rushed through his door, their hands reaching for him with professional concern. "I'm fine," he insisted, though his voice shook with something that had nothing to do with fear of death and everything to do with fear of never seeing her again. "Sir, you could be in shock," the lead paramedic pressed, but Benjamin was already moving toward his desk, toward the security monitors that held the only evidence she had ever existed. Detective Courtney Morgan arrived as Benjamin studied the bloodstains on his marble floor, his fingers tracing the exact spot where Elizabeth's hand had pressed against his chest. The detective was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, someone who had seen enough violence to recognize when a man was hiding something. "She saved my life," Benjamin said before Detective Morgan could ask her first question. "Who was she?" Benjamin's laugh held no humor. "I don't know, but I'm going to find her." He examined the torn fabric from Elizabeth's cleaning uniform, a small piece that had caught on his cufflink when she pushed him to safety. The material was cheap, generic, but beneath his fingers it felt precious, sacred, like a relic from a saint who had appeared just long enough to perform a miracle. Detective Morgan watched him with the careful attention of someone who understood obsession. "Tell me what happened." "I was reviewing quarterly reports when the window exploded." Benjamin's voice grew distant as he relived those seconds that had changed everything. "She came out of nowhere, moved like she was trained for this. Military maybe, or something else." "Something else?" "She knew exactly where the shooter was positioned. She didn't hesitate, didn't look around for help. She just acted." Benjamin's fingers tightened around the fabric scrap, like she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. His security chief, John Deep, entered the office with the grim expression of a man whose job had just become infinitely more complicated. John was a former Army Ranger who took personal responsibility for every threat against Benjamin, and tonight he had failed in the most spectacular way possible. "Sir," John said, his voice tight with frustration and professional concern, "we've reviewed all the footage from the past 6 hours. She doesn't exist." Benjamin looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "No employee records match her face, no identity in any database, no security badge, no background check, no hiring paperwork." John's hands clenched at his sides. It's like she was never here. But she had been here. Benjamin could still feel the warmth of her palm against his chest, could still see the way her brown eyes had blazed with determination as she shielded his body with her own. She had been real, alive, bleeding for him. "Run facial recognition," Benjamin ordered, his voice carrying the authority that had built cross-security technologies into a billion-dollar empire. "Use every database we have access to. Government, private sector, international. I don't care what it costs." Detective Morgan raised an eyebrow. "That's a lot of resources for a stranger." "She's not a stranger." The words came out before Benjamin could stop them, surprising him with their intensity. "She's the woman who saved my life." As the detective and John Deep continued their investigation, Benjamin found himself alone in his office again, surrounded by the evidence of violence and the absence of the woman who had prevented his murder. He walked to the shattered window, glass crunching beneath his Italian leather shoes, and looked out at the city where Elizabeth Brick was disappearing into the night. Board member Pascal Kings arrived during the investigation, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, his expensive suit immaculate. Pascal was old money Manhattan, the kind of man who believed leadership was inherited rather than earned. He surveyed the destruction with the calculating eyes of someone already planning how to use this crisis to his advantage. "Benjamin," Pascal's voice carried false concern wrapped in political ambition. "Thank God you're alive, but we need to discuss what this means for the company." "What it means," Benjamin replied without turning from the window, "is that someone wants me dead." And they nearly succeeded. Pascal moved closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The board is going to have questions about your security protocols, about your judgment." Benjamin finally turned to face the man who had been questioning his leadership since the day Benjamin took control of the company his parents had built. "Are you suggesting this was my fault?" "I'm suggesting that a CEO who can't protect himself might not be the right person to protect a multi-billion-dollar company and its shareholders." The words hit their target, but not in the way Pascal intended. Instead of doubt, they sparked something harder in Benjamin's chest: determination. He had built cross-security technologies on the foundation of protecting others, of using technology to keep people safe. Tonight, a woman with no name and no past had protected him. Tomorrow, he would find her. His sister Jennifer Cross entered the office just as Pascal was leaving, and the contrast between them was stark. Where Pascal radiated political calculation, Jennifer brought warmth and genuine concern. She was 2 years younger than Benjamin's 34 years. But she had inherited their mother's ability to see through facades to the truth beneath. "You're not thinking straight," she said, studying his face with the penetrating attention only a sister could manage. "I'm thinking perfectly clearly. You're obsessed with a woman who doesn't want to be found." Jennifer picked up the fabric scrap from Benjamin's desk, holding it delicately between her fingers. "This isn't healthy, Ben." But Benjamin was already turning back to his computer screens, already pulling up the facial recognition software that would scan every camera in Manhattan, every database cross-security technologies had access to. Somewhere in this city was a woman named Elizabeth Brick. He had heard the detective say her name, had seen it on the cleaning company roster before it mysteriously disappeared from their servers. "She saved my life, Jen. She took a bullet meant for me. And then she vanished without explanation. Don't you think that's worth questioning?" Benjamin's hands stilled on the keyboard. He did question it, had been questioning it since the moment he realized she was gone. But questioning it and accepting it were two different things entirely. That night, alone in his office after the police had finished their investigation, Benjamin found himself drawn to the spot where Elizabeth had tackled him to safety. He knelt on the marble floor, pressing his palm against the place where her hand had rested on his chest. The blood had been cleaned away, but he could still feel her presence in the room, could still smell the faint scent of jasmine that had clung to her hair. Have you ever been saved by a stranger who disappeared without a trace, leaving you desperate to find them again? Tell me your story in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if this tale of mystery and forbidden attraction is already pulling at your heartstrings. He closed his eyes and let himself remember the weight of her body against his, the way she had moved with lethal precision, the intensity in her brown eyes that spoke of secrets he desperately wanted to understand. In that moment, Benjamin Cross, a man who controlled a technological empire, who could access information on anyone, anywhere, felt completely powerless. But powerless was not a feeling Benjamin Cross accepted easily. He pulled out his phone and called John Deep, not caring that it was past midnight. "I want every security camera in a 10-block radius reviewed," he said when John answered on the second ring. "I want to know where she went, how she got out of the building, what route she took, and I want to know who else was watching this office tonight." "Sir, the police are already." "The police don't have our resources." Benjamin stood and walked to his wall of monitors, each screen showing a different view of Manhattan's electronic eyes. "Someone tried to kill me tonight, John. But more importantly, someone saved me. I need to understand both." As he spoke, Benjamin touched the spot on his chest where Elizabeth's hand had pressed, where her blood had stained his shirt, where her warmth had burned itself into his memory. Tomorrow, he would begin the hunt for a ghost who had given him everything and asked for nothing in return. But tonight, he would dream of brown eyes filled with secrets and a whispered voice saying his name in the darkness. The city spread out below his office like a glittering maze, and somewhere in that maze was Elizabeth Brick, the woman who had vanished with his heart, and the answers to questions he was only beginning to understand how to ask. 3 days later, Benjamin Cross stood in his private gym on the 38th floor of Cross Tower, throwing punches at a heavy bag with the focused intensity of a man trying to fight off ghosts. Sweat poured down his muscled torso as he drove his fists into the leather, each impact a futile attempt to silence the questions that had consumed every waking moment since she disappeared. The facial recognition software had turned up nothing. Elizabeth Brick, if that was even her real name, had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. But she had existed. Benjamin's body remembered every second of her weight against him, every breath she had taken while shielding him from death. He was so lost in the rhythm of his workout that he almost missed the flash of movement in the mirror behind the punching bag. Almost. Training kicked in, the martial arts lessons his father had insisted upon, the survival instincts that had kept him alive in boardrooms full of corporate sharks. Benjamin spun just as Michael Petrov stepped out from behind the weight machines, a silenced pistol, already rising toward Benjamin's chest. Time slowed to a crawl. Benjamin saw the assassin's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the cold calculation in Petrov's eyes, saw his own death approaching with mechanical precision. He started to dive sideways, knowing he would never be fast enough. And then she was there. Elizabeth Brick emerged from the shadows near the emergency exit like a force of nature, her body moving with the fluid grace of someone who had turned violence into art. She hit Michael Petrov in a flying tackle that sent his shot wide, the bullet embedding itself in the mirrored wall instead of Benjamin's heart. The two trained killers rolled across the gym floor in a deadly dance, each seeking the advantage that would mean life or death. Elizabeth moved like water around Petrov's attempts to regain control of his weapon, her hands striking with surgical precision at pressure points that would incapacitate without killing. Benjamin watched in stunned fascination as the woman who had haunted his dreams for 3 days dismantled a professional assassin with the casual efficiency of someone turning off a light switch. Within 30 seconds, Michael Petrov lay unconscious on the gym floor, his weapon sliding across the polished wood to stop at Benjamin's feet. Elizabeth rose gracefully, not even breathing hard, and turned to face him. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the gym, she was even more beautiful than memory had painted her. Her dark skin glowed with perspiration from the brief struggle, her athletic figure outlined in form-fitting black clothing that suggested both elegance and lethality. "You're bleeding," Benjamin said, noticing the dark stain spreading across the shoulder of her tactical shirt. "It's not my blood," she replied, her voice carrying a slight southern accent that hadn't been there during their first encounter. This time, their eyes met across the space between them, and Benjamin felt the same electric connection that had burned through him 3 nights ago. But now, instead of chaos and confusion, there was recognition, understanding. The woman who had saved his life once had just done it again. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough with exertion and emotions he couldn't begin to name. Someone who should have stayed away. Elizabeth bent to check Michael Petrov's pulse, her movements professional and detached. "But apparently, I'm not very good at following orders." "Orders from whom?" She looked up at him then, and Benjamin saw something vulnerable flicker behind her composed facade. "People who would kill us both if they knew I was here." Before Benjamin could respond, Elizabeth was moving again, securing Petrov's weapon and checking his pockets for identification with the methodical thoroughness of someone who had done this many times before. Benjamin found himself studying her face, memorizing the curve of her cheekbone, the way her lips pressed together when she concentrated. "We need to leave," she said, standing and facing him with professional urgency. "Now, there will be others." "Others?" "This isn't random, Benjamin." The sound of his name on her lips sent heat racing through his veins. "Someone wants you dead badly enough to hire multiple assets. Your office, your gym, they know your patterns." She moved to the wall of mirrors and pressed her palm against a specific spot, revealing a hidden panel that Benjamin hadn't known existed in his own building. From inside, she pulled out a black duffel bag that contained enough weapons and surveillance equipment to supply a small army. "How did you—" "I've been watching you for weeks." Elizabeth's admission hung in the air between them like a confession. It was supposed to be simple surveillance, protection from a distance. "I wasn't supposed to make contact." "But you did." "But I did." She turned to face him, and Benjamin saw the weight of that decision in her brown eyes. "And now, neither of us is safe." Benjamin stepped closer, drawn by the vulnerability he heard beneath her professional composure. "Who are you protecting me from?" "I don't know yet. Someone with enough resources to hire Michael Petrov, enough intelligence to map your routines, enough reach to get close to you twice." Elizabeth shouldered the duffel bag, wincing slightly as the strap pressed against her wounded shoulder. "What I do know is that they won't stop until you're dead. Then we find them first." "We?" Elizabeth's eyebrows rose with something that might have been amusement if the situation weren't so deadly serious. "Benjamin, you're a CEO, not a soldier." "I'm the CEO of a security company," he corrected, moving to his locker to pull on a shirt. "I know more about finding people who don't want to be found than you might think." Elizabeth watched him dress with professional assessment, but Benjamin caught the way her gaze lingered on his chest, the way her breathing changed slightly when he turned toward her. The attraction between them was mutual, undeniable, and dangerous, in ways that had nothing to do with assassins and everything to do with the way she made him feel alive, in ways he had forgotten were possible. "Your technology won't help against people like this," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not, but your training combined with my resources might." Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, her internal struggle visible in the tension around her eyes. Benjamin had built an empire by reading people, by understanding what they wanted and needed, and he could see that Elizabeth Brick wanted to trust him almost as much as she feared what that trust might cost. "There's a safe house," she said finally. 40 minutes outside the city. We can regroup there, figure out our next move." "Our next move?" "You're right about one thing," Elizabeth said, moving toward the emergency exit with the fluid grace that had first captured his attention. "Separately, we're both targets. Together?" She paused, looking back at him with something that might have been hope. "Together, we might have a chance." Benjamin followed her toward the exit, stepping over Michael Petrov's unconscious form without a second glance. As they reached the stairwell, Elizabeth suddenly stopped and pressed him back against the concrete wall, her body covering his as footsteps echoed from the floors above. The position was intimate, protective, electric. Elizabeth's chest pressed against his, her face inches from his own, her breath warm against his lips. Benjamin could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could smell the faint scent of jasmine that seemed to follow her like a signature. "Stay quiet," she whispered, but her voice carried more than professional concern. It carried awareness, attraction, the recognition of something building between them that neither could control. They stood frozen like that, for 30 seconds that felt like 30 hours, listening to the footsteps fade, feeling each other's heartbeat. fighting the pull that drew them together with magnetic intensity. When Elizabeth finally stepped back, her professional composure had cracked just enough to show the woman beneath the operative. "We should go," she said, but her voice was rougher than before. The ride to the safe house passed in charged silence, Elizabeth driving a nondescript sedan with the same deadly precision she brought to everything else. Benjamin found himself studying her profile in the dim light from the dashboard, noting the way she checked the mirrors every few seconds, the way her hands gripped the steering wheel with controlled strength. "You said you'd been watching me for weeks," he said, as they left the city lights behind. "What did you see?" Elizabeth's smile was barely visible in the darkness. "A man who works too hard, trusts too easily, and cares too much about protecting everyone except himself." "Is that a professional assessment?" It started as one. She glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to the road, but somewhere along the way, it became something else. The safe house was a small cabin tucked into the woods of upstate New York, invisible from the main road and equipped with enough security technology to rival a government installation. Elizabeth disabled the alarm system with practiced efficiency, leading Benjamin inside a space that managed to be both fortress and home. "How long have you been in this business?" Benjamin asked, watching her move through the cabin's main room. "Checking windows and sight lines with automatic precision." "Since I was 15. Elizabeth's voice carried the weight of years spent in shadows. "My family was killed in a home invasion. 3 men with guns who wanted something my father had hidden. They tortured my parents for information, then decided to eliminate all witnesses." Benjamin felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Elizabeth, I hid in a closet and listened to them die." She turned to face him, her brown eyes reflecting pain that time had dulled but never erased. "The organization found me 2 days later, catatonic and covered in my mother's blood. They gave me purpose, training, a reason to keep breathing. They turned you into a weapon. They turned me into a protector." Elizabeth's voice carried fierce pride mixed with something that might have been regret. "For 14 years, I've kept innocent people alive. Politicians, whistleblowers, people whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time." Benjamin moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability she was showing him, the trust implicit in sharing her darkest memories. "And now you're protecting me." "Yes," the word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Even though it's against orders. Even though it could get us both killed." "Why?" Elizabeth looked at him for a long moment, her professional composure finally cracking completely. "Because when I researched your background, I learned about your parents, a car accident that wasn't an accident. 2 people who died because they refused to sell weapons technology to the wrong buyers." Benjamin's breath caught. "How did you? We're more alike than either of us wanted to admit," Elizabeth continued, "both orphaned by violence. Both trying to protect others from the kind of pain we know too well. Both carrying guilt for not being able to save the people we loved most." The recognition hit Benjamin like a physical blow. She was right. They were kindred spirits, 2 people shaped by loss into protectors, 2 souls who understood the weight of responsibility and the cost of caring too much. "Elizabeth." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he cupped her face gently in his hands. "I've never felt this connected to someone so quickly. It should scare me, but with you it feels right." "It scares me," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Everything about this scares me. I was trained that emotional connections are dangerous, that caring about someone makes you weak, compromised. And now I think my trainers might have been wrong about a lot of things." They stood like that in the cabin's main room, the space between them charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Benjamin could see Elizabeth fighting her instincts, could see her years of training warring with something deeper, more fundamental. "I should check your shoulder," he said finally, noticing the way she favored her left side. "That wound needs attention." Elizabeth nodded, some of the tension leaving her body. "There's a medical kit in the bathroom." Benjamin found the supplies and returned to discover Elizabeth had removed her tactical shirt, revealing a sports bra and the lean muscle definition of someone who had turned her body into a precisely calibrated instrument. The bullet graze across her shoulder was shallow, but still bleeding, a stark reminder of how close death had come to both of them. "Sit," Benjamin said, indicating the cabin's couch. Elizabeth complied, and Benjamin knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he cleaned the wound. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. The careful way his fingers moved across her skin, the way her breathing changed when he touched her, the electric current that seemed to flow between them with every contact. "You're good at this," Elizabeth said softly, watching his face as he worked. "My parents insisted I learn basic medical training. They said anyone who wanted to protect others had to be able to heal them too." "They sound like good people." They were. Benjamin's voice carried the same pain Elizabeth's had when she spoke of her family. They believed in using technology to make the world safer, not more dangerous. When certain buyers wanted to turn their security innovations into weapons, they said no. They said no, and 3 days later, their car went off a bridge in broad daylight, with no witnesses and no mechanical explanation. Elizabeth's hand covered his, stopping his movement as he bandaged her shoulder. "How old were you?" 26. Old enough to take over the company, young enough to make a lot of mistakes. Benjamin looked up and met her eyes. "Old enough to spend the next 8 years wondering if I could have saved them if I'd been stronger, smarter, more careful." "Benjamin," Elizabeth's voice carried absolute certainty, "what happened to your parents wasn't your fault. Just like what happened to my family wasn't mine. We were victims of other people's greed and violence. I know that intellectually. But knowing it and believing it are different things." "Yes." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing small circles on the back of Benjamin's hand. "The organization taught me that the only way to honor the dead is to protect the living. Maybe your parents would want you to stop carrying their guilt and start living the life they died trying to give you." Benjamin finished securing the bandage and sat back, but he didn't let go of Elizabeth's hand. "Is that what you're trying to do? Live the life your parents died trying to give you?" "I'm trying." Elizabeth's smile was soft, vulnerable, real. "For the first time in 14 years, I'm actually trying." They sat in the cabin's warm light, two people who had found something unexpected in each other, two protectors who had never learned how to protect their own hearts. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with sounds that might have been whispers or warnings. But inside, for the first time since their worlds had collided, they felt safe. "We should try to get some rest," Elizabeth said eventually, though she made no move to pull her hand away from his. "Tomorrow we need to figure out who wants you dead and why." "Elizabeth." Benjamin's voice stopped her as she started to rise. "Thank you. For saving my life, for trusting me with your story. For being here when you don't have to be." "I do have to be," she said simply, "not because of orders or duty or professional obligation. I have to be here, because walking away from you feels impossible." Benjamin felt something shift in his chest, something that had been locked away since his parents died suddenly opening like a flower towards sunlight. "Stay close tonight?" "I'll be watching over you," Elizabeth promised. "I always am." But as Benjamin settled onto the couch and Elizabeth took position in a chair where she could see all the windows, neither of them spoke about the way their hands had lingered together or the way something fundamental had changed between them in the space of a single conversation. Neither of them mentioned that protection was starting to feel a lot like love. Benjamin woke to the sound of Elizabeth's voice, soft and vulnerable in a way he had never heard before. She was asleep in the chair across from him, her body positioned to maintain visual contact with all the cabin's entry points even in unconsciousness. But her professional composure had dissolved in sleep. "Please," she whispered to someone in her dreams, her head turning restlessly against the chair's back. "Don't hurt them. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't hurt my family." Benjamin rose quietly from the couch, drawn by the pain in her voice, the glimpse of the 15-year-old girl who still lived somewhere beneath the lethal operative. As he approached, Elizabeth's breathing quickened, her hands clenching as if fighting invisible restraints. "Elizabeth," he said softly, not wanting to startle someone whose reflexes were calibrated for violence. "You're safe. You're with me. Her eyes snapped open instantly, the transition from sleep to full alertness, so rapid it was almost inhuman. For a moment, she looked confused, displaced, as if she couldn't reconcile the cabin's peaceful atmosphere with whatever horrors had been playing in her dreams. "Benjamin?" Her voice carried the disorientation of someone caught between past and present. "You were having a nightmare." Elizabeth sat up straighter, her professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "I'm fine. Just old memories. They surface sometimes when I'm off my guard." "You called yourself by a different name," Benjamin said gently, settling onto the coffee table, facing her chair. "Liz, you begged someone not to hurt your family." Something cracked in Elizabeth's carefully maintained composure. "Liz died with them," she said quietly. "The organization doesn't use real names. Elizabeth Brick is just another cover identity. Another layer of protection between who I am and who I used to be." "What was your real name?" "Does it matter?" Elizabeth's laugh held no humor. "That girl is gone. She died in a closet listening to her parents scream." "She's not gone." Benjamin reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he took her hands in his. "She's right here, trying to save people the way no one was able to save her family." Elizabeth looked down at their joined hands, her thumbs tracing across his knuckles with unconscious tenderness. "You don't understand what the organization does to you. They strip away everything personal, everything that makes you human, and rebuild you into something useful. And yet here you are, risking everything to save someone you barely know. That doesn't sound like a weapon to me. That sounds like someone who never forgot how to care." Before Elizabeth could respond, her encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message. She reluctantly released Benjamin's hands to check the device, and her expression immediately hardened. "What is it?" "Monica, my handler." Elizabeth's voice carried tension that hadn't been there moments before. "She's coming here, now." "Is that a problem?" "It's a catastrophe." Elizabeth stood and began moving through the cabin with renewed urgency, securing weapons and checking sightlines. "Monica Santos doesn't make house calls unless someone is about to die." 20 minutes later, a black SUV pulled into the cabin's concealed driveway with the silent efficiency of a predator stalking prey. Monica Santos emerged from the driver's seat like a force of nature, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of presence that suggested she had seen every form of human violence and survived them all. She entered the cabin without knocking, her dark eyes immediately cataloging Benjamin's presence with the clinical assessment of someone deciding whether he represented an asset or a liability. "Elizabeth." Monica's voice carried 20 years of authority, and something that might have been maternal concern. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About the fact that you've compromised yourself for a civilian." Monica's gaze shifted to Benjamin, taking in his expensive clothing, his confident posture, the way he positioned himself slightly in front of Elizabeth, despite knowing she was the more dangerous person in the room. "Mr. Cross, I'm Monica Santos, Elizabeth's supervisor." "The woman who's been sending her to risk her life for strangers?" Benjamin replied, his voice carrying protective steel that surprised all three of them. Monica's eyebrows rose slightly. "The woman who's kept her alive for 14 years by teaching her not to form emotional attachments that compromise judgment." "Monica," Elizabeth said, moving to diffuse the tension building between the two most important people in her world. "Benjamin isn't a threat to the organization. No, he's something worse. He's a weakness." Monica pulled out a tablet and showed Elizabeth satellite images of the cabin, time-stamped from various angles over the past 12 hours. "Our surveillance shows you've spent the night in close proximity, that you shared personal information, that your professional boundaries have been compromised. I saved his life, twice, against direct orders to maintain surveillance only." Monica's voice carried disappointment that cut deeper than anger. "Elizabeth, you know the rules. Emotional involvement leads to poor judgment, which leads to dead assets." Benjamin watched the exchange with growing understanding of the world Elizabeth inhabited, the impossible choices she faced every day. "She's not an asset," he said quietly. "She's a human being. Human beings don't survive in our business, Mr. Cross. Assets do." Monica turned back to Elizabeth, her expression softening just enough to show the genuine care beneath her professional demeanor. "You know I don't want to do this. but they'll eliminate you as a compromised asset if you continue this relationship. I can't protect you if you won't protect yourself." Elizabeth felt the familiar walls rising around her heart, the survival instincts that had kept her alive for 14 years, screaming at her to walk away, to disappear, to choose safety over the terrifying vulnerability of caring about someone else. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you've 48 hours to complete this assignment and extract. After that, Elizabeth Brick disappears forever, and you get a new identity in a place where Benjamin Cross can never find you." The ultimatum hung in the air, like a death sentence. Benjamin felt something cold settling in his chest as he watched Elizabeth's face, saw her internal war between duty and desire, between the life she had always known and the life she was only beginning to imagine. "And if I refuse?" Monica's silence was answer enough. "I understand," Elizabeth said finally, her voice carefully controlled. 48 hours. Monica nodded and moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at Benjamin. "You seem like a good man, Mr. Cross. But good men in our world get the people they care about killed. Don't make Elizabeth pay for your principles." After Monica left, the cabin felt smaller, more fragile, as if the walls themselves understood how temporary this sanctuary had become. Elizabeth stood at the window, watching the trees bend in the wind, her shoulders rigid with tension. "Elizabeth," Benjamin said, approaching her carefully, "we'll figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out." Her voice was flat, professional. The woman who had shared her nightmares with him already retreating behind familiar defenses. "Monica's right. I've been compromised. This ends in 48 hours. "What if it doesn't have to?" Elizabeth turned to face him, and Benjamin saw that the vulnerable woman from the night before was still there, hidden beneath layers of training and fear. "You don't understand the organization's reach. They have resources that make your technology company look like a corner shop. They can make people disappear, create new identities, eliminate threats with surgical precision. Then we disappear first." "Benjamin," Elizabeth's voice carried infinite sadness, "you have a life, a company, a sister who depends on you. I can't ask you to give that up for someone you've known for 3 days. You're not asking, I'm offering." Benjamin moved closer, drawn by the pain in her eyes, the way she was already preparing to say goodbye. "Elizabeth, I've spent 8 years building walls around my heart, telling myself that caring too much is dangerous, that emotional connections make you weak. But with you, with me what? With you, I remember what it feels like to be alive instead of just surviving." Elizabeth closed her eyes as if his words were physically painful. "In 48 hours, Monica will return with extraction orders. If I'm still here, if I've chosen you over the organization, she'll have no choice but to eliminate both of us. Then we have 48 hours to find another solution." "There is no other solution. There's always another solution." Benjamin reached out and cupped her face gently, his thumbs tracing the high curve of her cheekbones. "Elizabeth, I've built my entire career on solving impossible problems. Give me 48 hours to solve this one." She leaned into his touch despite herself, her eyes opening to meet his with something that looked dangerously like hope. "What are you proposing?" "A partnership. Your skills, my resources. We find out who's trying to kill me and why. We neutralize the threat. And then we present Monica with a solution that makes you valuable to the organization in a new way." "What kind of new way?" Benjamin's smile carried the confidence that had built an empire. "Cross-security technologies could use a consultant who understands threats that conventional security can't handle. Someone who knows how to protect high-value targets from enemies that don't officially exist." Elizabeth stared at him for a long moment, and Benjamin could see her brilliant mind working through possibilities, calculating odds, weighing hope against experience. "You're talking about changing everything. My whole life, my identity, my relationship with the only family I've had for 14 years. I'm talking about choosing the life you want instead of the life you were given." Before Elizabeth could respond, Benjamin moved to the fireplace and began building a fire, his movements sure and confident. "That gives us time." "Time for what?" Benjamin looked up from the kindling, and Elizabeth saw something in his blue eyes that made her breath catch. Time to stop pretending we don't feel this thing between us. Time to acknowledge that some connections are worth risking everything for. As the fire caught and began to warm the cabin's main room, casting dancing shadows on the walls, Elizabeth felt the last of her professional defenses beginning to crumble. The storm outside seemed to be washing away not just the day's heat, but years of careful emotional control. Benjamin. Her voice was barely audible over the rain. What you're suggesting, what you're offering, I've never had anything like that. I don't know how to be someone's partner instead of their protector. Neither do I. Benjamin stood and faced her, the firelight highlighting the planes of his face, the sincerity in his expression. I've spent 8 years being everyone else's CEO, everyone else's brother, everyone else's solution to their problems. I've never been just Benjamin, with someone who could handle all of me. All of you? The parts that are broken, the parts that are scared, the parts that wake up at 3 in the morning, wondering if I'm strong enough to protect the people I care about. Benjamin took a step closer, and Elizabeth didn't back away. The parts that have been waiting 8 years for someone who understands what it costs to care too much. Elizabeth felt something inside her chest breaking open like a flower that had been trapped in winter for too long. I'm dangerous, Benjamin. Everything about me. Everything I've been trained to do. I'm not safe for you. You're the safest thing that's ever happened to me. Benjamin reached out and took her hands, pulling her gently toward the fire's warmth. Elizabeth, for 3 days, I've been thinking about you every second. Not just because you saved my life, but because you made me remember what it feels like to want something for myself instead of just surviving. The rain intensified outside, turning the world beyond the cabin into a blur of water and wind, creating a cocoon of intimacy around them. Elizabeth looked into Benjamin's eyes and saw her own longing reflected there, her own desperate need for connection, for someone who understood the weight of responsibility and the cost of caring. In the morning, we go back to being targets, she said softly. Back to running, hiding, fighting. Back to a world where people like us don't get happy endings. But tonight we have this. Elizabeth stepped closer, eliminating the last inches of space between them. Tonight we have each other. Benjamin's hands moved to frame her face, his touch gentle despite the strength she could feel in his fingers. Elizabeth, I need you to know something. What I feel for you, what's happening between us, it's not gratitude or adrenaline or proximity. It's not because you saved my life. What is it? It's because you saw straight through every wall I've built and decided I was worth saving anyway. Benjamin's voice dropped to a whisper. It's because you make me want to be the man my parents raised me to be, instead of the man their death turned me into. Elizabeth felt tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in 14 years, burning behind her eyes. Benjamin, say my name again. Benjamin. The word came out like a prayer, like a promise, like the first word of a language she was only beginning to learn. He kissed her then, softly at first, a question rather than a demand. Elizabeth answered by rising on her toes, by threading her fingers through his hair, by opening herself to the possibility that some risks were worth taking. The kiss deepened as years of careful control gave way to need, to hunger, to the recognition that they had found something neither had dared to hope for. Benjamin's hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer, and Elizabeth marveled at how perfectly she fit against him, how her body seemed designed to complement his. Elizabeth, Benjamin whispered against her lips, his voice rough with emotion and desire. Tell me this is real. Tell me you feel it too. I feel it. Elizabeth's hands moved to the buttons of his shirt, her fingers trembling with something that wasn't fear. I feel everything. The storm outside raged with increasing fury, but inside the cabin, time seemed to slow as they explored this new territory between them. Benjamin's hands mapped the lean strength of Elizabeth's body with reverent attention, learning the scars that told the story of her dangerous life, the places that made her breath catch, the ways to make her forget everything except the warmth building between them. You're sure? Benjamin asked, his forehead resting against hers, giving her space to change her mind, even as his body betrayed how much he wanted her. "I'm sure." Elizabeth's smile is soft, real, completely without the professional guard she wore with everyone else. "Benjamin, I've spent 14 years learning how to protect everyone except myself. Tonight, I want to learn how to let someone protect me. Always," Benjamin promised, sealing the vow with another kiss that tasted like rain and possibility and the first moment of the rest of their lives. In the firelight, with the storm providing a symphony outside their windows, Elizabeth Brick and Benjamin Cross discovered the language only hearts could speak, learned that some walls were meant to crumble, understood that finding home sometimes meant risking everything you thought you knew about safety. Later, as they lay tangled in blankets before the fire, Elizabeth traced patterns on Benjamin's chest with fingertips that had learned gentleness instead of violence. "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we start fighting for this," Benjamin said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Tomorrow we prove that some things are worth changing the world for." Elizabeth smiled against his skin, feeling for the first time in 14 years that tomorrow might hold something other than duty and danger. Outside, the storm began to weaken, but inside, something stronger than weather had been born in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Elizabeth woke in Benjamin's arms as dawn painted the cabin windows with soft gold light, the storm having passed sometime during the night. For the first time in 14 years, she felt truly safe. Not the hypervigilant alertness that had kept her alive, but the deep, bone-level safety of being completely known and completely accepted. Benjamin's chest rose and fell beneath her cheek in the steady rhythm of peaceful sleep, and Elizabeth allowed herself a few precious moments to study his face in the morning light. Without the weight of responsibility he carried during waking hours, he looked younger, almost vulnerable, like the 26-year-old who had lost his parents and spent 8 years building walls around his heart. But those walls had crumbled last night. They both had surrendered everything, not just their bodies, but their fears, their defenses. The careful distance they maintained from the world. In the firelight, they had discovered that some connections transcended logic, transcended safety, transcended every rule they had learned about survival. Elizabeth's phone buzzed softly from the coffee table, bringing reality crashing back with surgical precision. She slipped carefully from Benjamin's embrace, pulling on his discarded dress shirt before checking the encrypted message. "Monica, 46 hours remaining. Use them wisely." The countdown had begun. Benjamin stirred as Elizabeth returned to his side, his blue eyes opening to find her face immediately. As if even in sleep he had been aware of her presence. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep and something deeper. "Good morning." Elizabeth leaned down to kiss him softly, marveling at how natural the gesture felt, how right it was to wake up beside someone who knew her real name and chose to stay anyway. "Any word from Monica?" A reminder, 46 hours. Elizabeth settled back against Benjamin's chest, drawing strength from his warmth even as her mind began calculating odds, analyzing escape routes, preparing for the worst. "Benjamin, what we did last night changed everything," he finished, his arms tightening around her protectively. "Elizabeth, I meant what I said. We're going to find a way through this." "And if we can't?" Benjamin was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking through her hair with gentle repetition. "Then we'll face whatever comes together. But I'm not giving up on us before we've even tried to fight for this." They spent the morning transforming the cabin into a command center, combining Elizabeth's tactical expertise with Benjamin's technological resources. Elizabeth spread detailed maps across the dining table, while Benjamin connected his encrypted laptop to the cabin's secure internet, creating a digital war room that would have impressed military strategists. "Tell me about cross-security technologies," Elizabeth said, studying building schematics on Benjamin's screen. "What exactly do you do that's worth killing for?" Benjamin pulled up classified files with the casual efficiency of someone accustomed to handling sensitive information. "We develop security systems for high-value targets, government installations, corporate headquarters, private residences, but the real value is in our predictive threat assessment software." "Predicted how?" We can analyze patterns in digital footprints, financial transactions, travel records, communication metadata. Essentially, we can predict when and how someone might be targeted before the threat materializes. Benjamin's fingers moved across the keyboard, bringing up complex algorithms that looked like digital poetry to Elizabeth's trained eye. 3 years ago, we prevented an assassination attempt on a Supreme Court justice. 2 years ago, we identified a terrorist cell planning to attack a children's hospital. Elizabeth felt something cold settling in her stomach. Benjamin, software like that. In the wrong hands, it could be used to identify targets instead of protecting them. Exactly. Benjamin's voice carried the weight of someone who had been living with that knowledge for years, which is why certain buyers have been very persistent about acquiring it, and why my parents died when they refused to sell. Who are the buyers? Benjamin pulled up another file, this one containing financial records and corporate structures that looked deliberately complex. Officially, legitimate government contractors and private security firms. Unofficially, anyone with enough money to make the legitimate buyers look the other way. Elizabeth studied the names on the screen, recognizing several from her organization's target files. These people don't just kill for money, Benjamin. They kill to control information, to eliminate competition, to send messages to other potential obstacles. Then we send them a message back. What kind of message? Benjamin's smile carried the confidence that had built an empire, but now it was tempered with something harder, more personal. That Benjamin Cross is no longer just a target. He's a man with the most dangerous protector in the world, and trying to kill him comes with consequences they haven't calculated. They worked through the afternoon in comfortable synchronization, Elizabeth's field experience combining with Benjamin's analytical mind to create strategies neither could have developed alone. She taught him how to read surveillance photos for details that revealed the photographer's location and training level. He showed her how to use facial recognition software to trace financial connections between seemingly unrelated organizations. "You're good at this," Elizabeth said, watching Benjamin identify a pattern in phone records that had escaped 3 intelligence agencies. "The analysis, the strategy. You think like an operative. I think like someone who's been hunted for 8 years without realizing it." Benjamin looked up from his laptop, and Elizabeth saw something darker in his expression than she had seen before. "Every decision I've made since my parents died, every security protocol, every business strategy, I've been preparing for this war without knowing I was already fighting it. And now I know who the enemy is." Benjamin stood and moved to the window, looking out at the forest that surrounded their temporary sanctuary. "Elizabeth, last night you asked what happens when we can't hide anymore, when we have to choose between running and fighting. I remember. I choose fighting." Benjamin turned back to face her, and Elizabeth saw in his blue eyes the same lethal determination she recognized in her own mirror. "I choose protecting the people I care about, no matter what it costs." Elizabeth felt something shift in her chest, recognition and pride and fear combining into something that made her breath catch. "You're not just talking about protecting yourself anymore. I'm talking about protecting us. This cabin, this partnership, what happened between us last night. I'm talking about fighting for the right to build something real with someone who understands what it costs to care too much." Before Elizabeth could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She answered with professional caution, but Benjamin saw her face change immediately, saw her professional mask slam back into place with military precision. "Monica?" Elizabeth's voice carried tension that made Benjamin move closer, ready to provide whatever support she needed. "Not Monica." The voice on the other end was male, cultured, carrying the kind of authority that suggested expensive education and expensive expectations. "This is Pascal Kings, Elizabeth. We need to talk." Benjamin felt ice spreading through his veins. Pascal, the board member who had questioned his security protocols, who had arrived at the scene of the first assassination attempt with suspicious timing, who had been positioning himself to benefit from Benjamin's death. "How did you get this number?" Elizabeth's voice was deadly calm, but Benjamin could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her free hand moved instinctively toward the weapon she kept at her hip. "I've known about you for weeks," Pascal said, his voice carrying smug satisfaction. "Did you really think you could watch Benjamin without being watched yourself?" I know about your organization, your handler Monica Santos, your real identity. I know about last night. Elizabeth's eyes met Benjamin's, and he saw his own realization reflected there. They hadn't been playing chess with an unknown opponent. They had been playing with someone who knew all their moves before they made them. What do you want? Elizabeth asked. What I've always wanted. Control of cross-security technologies and everything Benjamin Cross has built. Pascal's voice carried the casual cruelty of someone accustomed to treating people as assets to be acquired or eliminated. But now I have something even more valuable. I have leverage. Meeting? Meaning Benjamin's sister Jennifer is currently having lunch at Café Luna on Fifth Avenue. Completely unaware that her life depends on the decisions you and Benjamin make in the next few minutes. Benjamin felt the world tilt sideways. Jennifer, his sister, his only remaining family, the person he had spent 8 years protecting from exactly this kind of threat. She was supposed to be safe, supposed to be shielded by distance and anonymity from the dangers that surrounded him. If you hurt her, Benjamin started, but Pascal's laugh cut him off. Benjamin, always so predictable, always so willing to sacrifice everything for the people you love. Pascal's voice carried false sympathy wrapped around a steel core. I'm not going to hurt Jennifer, you are. Explain. Simple choice. Elizabeth walks away from you right now, disappears forever, and Jennifer gets to finish her lunch and go back to her perfectly ordinary life. Or, Elizabeth stays, and Jennifer becomes collateral damage in a war she never chose to fight. Elizabeth felt the familiar sensation of walls rising around her heart. Survival instincts screaming at her to run, to choose the safe option, to do what she had always done when caring became dangerous. But those walls felt different now, less like protection and more like prison bars. You can't protect everyone, Benjamin, Pascal continued. But you can save the one person who matters most. Choose your sister over your savior, and everyone gets to live. Benjamin looked at Elizabeth and saw her internal war playing out across her face. Duty warring with desire, training fighting against the connection they had forged in firelight and honesty. He saw her preparing to sacrifice herself for his sister's safety, preparing to walk away from what they had built to protect his family. No, Benjamin said quietly. I'm sorry? Pascal's voice carried surprise, as if he hadn't considered the possibility that Benjamin might refuse his perfectly logical ultimatum. I said no. Benjamin moved closer to Elizabeth, his hand covering hers on the phone. You want to threaten my family? You want to use my sister as leverage? Then you're about to learn what happens when you threaten someone under the protection of Elizabeth Brick. Elizabeth stared at him in amazement. Everything about the situation demanded that she leave, demanded that she choose his family's safety over their impossible love. But Benjamin was refusing to let her make that sacrifice, was choosing to fight instead of surrender. You're making a mistake, Pascal said, his voice losing its cultured composure. Jennifer dies, and then you die, and Elizabeth gets to live with the knowledge that her selfishness killed them both. Elizabeth isn't selfish, Benjamin said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. She's brave and brilliant, and about to teach you why the organization trained her to be their best asset. Elizabeth felt something dangerous and protective unfurling in her chest, something that had been locked away since she was 15 years old. For 14 years, she had protected strangers, had risked her life for people she would never see again. But Benjamin wasn't a stranger. Jennifer wasn't just another assignment. They were her family now, and family was worth breaking every rule she had ever learned. Pascal, Elizabeth said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that made experienced operatives take a step back. You just made the worst mistake of your life. How's that? You threatened someone I love. Elizabeth's smile was visible in her voice, cold and promising and absolutely lethal. And I'm very good at eliminating threats to people I love. She ended the call and immediately began moving through the cabin with renewed purpose, gathering weapons and equipment with the focused efficiency of someone preparing for war. Elizabeth, Benjamin said, watching her transform from the vulnerable woman who had shared his bed to the deadly operative who had saved his life. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Pascal Kings doesn't know me as well as he thinks he does. Elizabeth secured her tactical vest with quick, practiced movements. I'm thinking he's about to discover that threatening you and your sister is the fastest way to find out why the organization considers me their most dangerous asset. What about Monica's ultimatum? What about the 46 hours? Elizabeth paused in her preparations and looked at Benjamin with something that might have been peace. Monica said I had to choose between duty and love, but she was wrong about something fundamental. What's that? Protecting you isn't a choice between duty and love. Elizabeth moved to him, rising on her toes to kiss him softly, thoroughly, like a promise and a prayer combined. Protecting you is both. It's duty and love and purpose and everything I was trained to do, all focused on the one person who makes me remember what it feels like to be human. Benjamin felt something overwhelming and powerful settling in his chest, pride and fear and love, and the recognition that he was watching someone remarkable choose to fight for them instead of running from danger. What do you need from me? I need you to trust me. Elizabeth's brown eyes held absolute certainty. I need you to let me be what I was trained to be, but for the right reasons this time. Not because an organization ordered me to, but because I'm choosing to protect the man I love. Always, Benjamin said, sealing the promise with another kiss that tasted like determination and devotion, and the kind of love that changed the rules of engagement entirely. As they prepared to leave the cabin and face whatever Pascal Kings had planned, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't experienced since she was 15 years old. The absolute certainty that some things were worth risking everything to protect. And Benjamin Cross, CEO, protector, the man who had seen through her walls and decided she was worth saving, was definitely worth everything. The drive back to Manhattan passed in tense silence, Elizabeth's hands steady on the wheel while her mind calculated distances, angles, probabilities of success. Beside her, Benjamin monitored Jennifer's location through her phone's GPS signal, his jaw tight with the kind of controlled fear that came from loving someone in danger. She's still at the cafe, Benjamin said, his voice carrying relief and worry in equal measure. Same location for the past 20 minutes. Which means Pascal wants us to find her there. Elizabeth's eyes never left the road, but Benjamin could see her tactical mind working through scenarios, eliminating variables, preparing for multiple contingencies. It's not a kidnapping, it's a demonstration. He's showing us how easily he can reach the people we care about. Then we show him how wrong he is to threaten them. Elizabeth's smile was sharp as a blade. Exactly. Café Luna occupied the ground floor of a glass tower on Fifth Avenue, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering clear sightlines in both directions. Benjamin spotted Jennifer immediately. His sister sat at a corner table, blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight as she reviewed documents from her job at the art museum, completely unaware that her life had become a chess piece in someone else's game. "How do you want to handle this?" Benjamin asked, his protective instincts warring with his recognition that Elizabeth's expertise far exceeded his own in situations like this. "We don't want to spook Pascal by approaching Jennifer directly, but we need to confirm the threat is real before we make our next move." Elizabeth parked across the street, positioning their vehicle for a quick escape if necessary. "Can you access the cafe's security cameras from here?" Benjamin pulled out his tablet and began typing with practiced efficiency. "Give me 30 seconds. While Benjamin worked, Elizabeth studied the street through her practiced eye, cataloging potential threats, escape routes, positions where a sniper might have clear sight lines to the cafe's interior. Her training screamed that this was a trap, that Pascal Kings was manipulating them into exactly the position he wanted. But sometimes, walking into a trap was the only way to spring it on the person who set it. "Got it," Benjamin said, turning his tablet so Elizabeth could see the cafe's interior camera feeds. Jennifer's still at the corner table, but look at the man 2 tables behind her. Elizabeth studied the screen and felt cold recognition settling in her stomach. The man appeared to be reading a newspaper, but his positioning was too perfect, his attention too focused on maintaining the appearance of casual disinterest. "Professional surveillance," she confirmed. "Military bearing, tactical clothing disguised as business casual. Earpiece hidden, but visible if you know what to look for." So Pascal wasn't bluffing. Pascal never bluffs. That's what makes him dangerous. Elizabeth's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. She glanced at the screen and felt the situation escalate from complicated to lethal. The message was from Monica. Location compromised. Hostiles converging on your position. Extract immediately. We need to move, Elizabeth said, starting the engine. Now. What about Jennifer? We get her out, but not the way Pascal expects. Elizabeth pulled into traffic with controlled urgency, her mind already several moves ahead. Benjamin, call your sister. Tell her there's a family emergency, and she needs to leave the cafe immediately. Benjamin's fingers flew across his phone's screen. Jennifer, thank God. Listen to me carefully. You need to leave Cafe Luna right now. Don't ask questions. Don't look around. Just pay your check and walk out the front door. Elizabeth could hear Jennifer's confused protests through the phone's speaker, but Benjamin's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life or death decisions. Jen, I'm serious. Someone is watching you, and they're using you to get to me. I need you to trust me and leave. Now. Where should I go? Elizabeth took the phone from Benjamin's hand. Jennifer, this is Elizabeth. You don't know me, but I'm with your brother. Walk out of the cafe, turn left, and keep walking until you reach the subway entrance 3 blocks down. Take the first train that arrives, no matter where it's going. We'll find you. Who is this? Benjamin, what's going on? I'll explain everything later, Benjamin said, taking back the phone. But right now, you need to move. Please, Jen, trust me. Through the cafe's security cameras on Benjamin's tablet, they watched Jennifer gather her things with quick, nervous movements. The man at the surveillance table immediately reached for his earpiece, speaking into it with professional urgency. He's reporting her movement, Elizabeth observed, watching the surveillance feed while navigating through Manhattan traffic. Which means there are more assets in position. As if summoned by her words, Elizabeth's phone rang with Monica's encrypted number. She answered while executing a turn that would have impressed stunt drivers. Monica. Elizabeth, what the hell are you doing? Monica's voice carried 20 years of authority and genuine fear. Our satellites show at least 6 hostile assets converging on the financial district. This isn't a surveillance operation anymore, it's a kill mission. I know. Then you know you need to extract Benjamin Cross and disappear. Now, tonight, before this becomes a war zone. Elizabeth glanced at Benjamin, who was still monitoring Jennifer's progress through the cafe's cameras. What if I told you that disappearing isn't an option anymore? I'd say you're letting emotions compromise your judgment. And I'd say you're wrong. Elizabeth's voice carried certainty that surprised them both. Monica, for 14 years, you've told me that emotional connections make operatives weak, that caring about someone clouds judgment and gets people killed. Because it's true. Because it's incomplete. Elizabeth executed another turn, putting more distance between them and the cafe where armed men were now moving through the crowd with predatory purpose. You taught me to protect strangers because duty demands it. But you never taught me what it means to protect someone because love demands it. Monica was quiet for a long moment, and Elizabeth could almost hear her mentor's brilliant mind recalculating odds, reassessing variables, trying to understand how her most successful operative had become someone she no longer recognized. Elizabeth, Monica said finally, her voice softer than before. What are you saying? I'm saying Benjamin Cross isn't just an assignment anymore. He's the man I love, and his family is my family. And if Pascal Kings wants to threaten them, he's going to learn what happens when someone threatens everything I have left to lose. The organization will never approve. Then I guess I'm not asking for approval. Elizabeth's smile was visible in her voice, dangerous and determined and completely without regret. Monica, you saved my life when I was 15. You gave me purpose, training, a reason to keep breathing, but you never gave me a reason to live. Benjamin did that. Benjamin looked at her with something that might have been awe, understanding that she was choosing him over the only family she had known for 14 years, choosing their impossible love over the safety of organizational protection. Monica, Elizabeth continued, I'm not abandoning everything you taught me. I'm using it. Every skill, every lesson, every advantage you gave me, I'm using all of it to protect the man who made me remember what it feels like to be human. And if the organization decides you're a liability, then you'll have to decide whether you're Monica Santos the handler, or Monica the woman who's been more of a mother to me than anyone since my parents died. The line went quiet, except for the sound of Monica's breathing, and Elizabeth felt her heart breaking for the impossible position she was putting the woman who had saved her life. But some choices couldn't be avoided. Some lines couldn't be uncrossed. 36 hours, Monica said finally. I can give you 36 hours before the organization demands an answer about your status. That's all I need. Elizabeth. Monica's voice carried something that might have been pride mixed with fear. Be careful. Love makes you strong, but it also makes you reckless. Don't let caring about him get you both killed. After Monica disconnected, Elizabeth felt the weight of what she had just done settling around her like armor. She had burned bridges that could never be rebuilt, had chosen a path that led away from everything she had known, toward something terrifying and unknown. 36 hours, Benjamin said quietly, understanding the magnitude of what she had sacrificed for him. 36 hours to end this. Elizabeth's voice carried grim determination. Benjamin, I need you to understand something. What I just did, what I just chose, there's no going back from this. If we fail, if Pascal wins, I can't return to the organization. I can't disappear and start over with a new identity. Meaning? Meaning we don't fail. Elizabeth's brown eyes met his with absolute certainty. We end this threat permanently, or we die trying. Those are the only options now. Benjamin felt something shift in his chest. Recognition that the woman beside him had just wagered everything on their ability to protect each other and win a war against enemies with unlimited resources. Elizabeth, what you just did was choose you over everything else in my life, she finished. Was choose us over safety, over duty, over every lesson I learned about survival. Why? Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, her attention split between navigating traffic and monitoring the tactical situation developing around them. Because for 14 years I've been existing instead of living. Because protecting strangers is duty, but protecting you feels like purpose. Because when I'm with you, I remember that Elizabeth Brick isn't just a cover identity. She's the woman who deserves to fight for happiness, instead of just fighting to survive. Benjamin reached across the console to cover her hand with his, understanding that she had just committed herself to a course of action that would either save them both or destroy them completely. What's our next move? We get Jennifer to safety. We identify Pascal's resources and weaknesses. And then we eliminate the threat permanently. Elizabeth's smile was sharp as a blade, beautiful and deadly and completely without compromise. Benjamin, you wanted to know what happens when a CEO teams up with the most dangerous woman in the world. What happens? We stop playing defense and start playing offense. Elizabeth squeezed his hand, her grip steady and strong and absolutely certain. We stop being targets and start being the thing that other people should be afraid of. As they drove through Manhattan toward an uncertain future, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't experienced since she was 15 years old. The absolute certainty that some battles were worth fighting, some people were worth dying for, and some loves were strong enough to change the rules of engagement entirely. What would you choose? Duty to the organization that saved you, or love that could destroy everything you've worked for? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for tomorrow's heart-stopping conclusion. Pascal Kings was about to learn that threatening Benjamin Cross meant going to war with someone who had spent 14 years learning how to win battles that other people didn't even know were being fought. And Elizabeth Brick had never lost a war. Jennifer Cross emerged from the subway station 20 minutes later, her face pale with confusion and fear, but her movements quick and purposeful. Benjamin had inherited their father's analytical mind, but Jennifer had inherited their mother's ability to adapt under pressure, and she spotted them immediately despite Elizabeth's careful positioning. Benjamin, Jennifer said as she slid into their vehicle, her voice tight with controlled panic. What is going on? Who was watching me? And who is she? Jennifer, this is Elizabeth Brick, Benjamin said, his voice carrying the weight of someone about to change his sister's understanding of the world forever. She saved my life 3 times, and she's the reason you're still alive. Jennifer studied Elizabeth with the sharp assessment of someone who had learned to read people through years of museum work with wealthy donors and dangerous egos. You're not just a bodyguard, are you? No. Elizabeth said simply, meeting Jennifer's gaze in the rearview mirror. I'm something much more dangerous, and right now, that's the only thing standing between your family and people who want you both dead." "Dead? Benjamin, what have you gotten involved in?" Benjamin's laugh held no humor. "I didn't get involved in anything, Jen. I inherited it. Along with Mom and Dad's company, I inherited their enemies." Elizabeth listened to the siblings talk while monitoring their surroundings for threats, but part of her attention was focused on the family dynamic playing out behind her. Jennifer's protective instincts toward Benjamin were as strong as his toward her, and watching them together made Elizabeth understand something fundamental about the man she loved. Benjamin Cross wasn't just a CEO who happened to care about people. He was someone who had built his entire life around protecting others because he understood, on a bone-deep level, what it felt like to lose family to violence, just like her. "Where are we going?" Jennifer asked as Elizabeth turned onto a street that led away from Manhattan's business district. "Somewhere safe," Elizabeth said. "Benjamin, we need to make a decision about how to handle Pascal. We can keep running, keep protecting Jennifer reactively, or we can end this tonight." "What do you mean, end this?" Elizabeth pulled into the parking garage of a nondescript office building in Queens, choosing a spot that offered multiple escape routes and clear sight lines. "I mean, we stop letting Pascal Kings dictate the terms of this engagement and start making him react to us." She turned in her seat to face both siblings, her expression carrying the kind of calm that preceded violence. "Benjamin, Pascal isn't just after your company. He's after your life, your family, everything your parents built. And he's using professional assets to do it, which means he has resources that go beyond simple corporate greed." "What kind of resources?" "The kind that killed your parents 8 years ago." Elizabeth's words hit like physical blows, and she watched Benjamin's face change as the implications sank in. "Benjamin, Pascal Kings didn't just decide last week to eliminate you. He's been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment to take everything." Jennifer's face had gone white. "You're saying Pascal killed our parents?" "I'm saying Pascal has connections to the people who killed your parents, and now he's finishing what they started." Elizabeth pulled out her tablet and began bringing up financial records, corporate structures, shell companies that painted a picture of corruption spanning decades. "Look at this." The screen showed a complex web of financial relationships connecting Pascal Kings to the same overseas buyers who had approached Benjamin's parents years earlier: weapons manufacturers, private military contractors, governments with fluid relationships to international law. "Pascal isn't just a board member trying to seize control," Elizabeth continued. "He's a facilitator. He connects buyers who want military-grade security technology with sellers who are willing to ignore ethical considerations. Your parents refused to play along, so they were eliminated. You've been refusing for 8 years, so now it's your turn." Benjamin stared at the evidence with the expression of someone watching his understanding of the world reshape itself. "He's been waiting, all this time. He's been waiting for me to either cooperate or become enough of a threat to eliminate." "And what changed?" Jennifer asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elizabeth looked at Benjamin with something that might have been regret. "I did. When I started protecting Benjamin, when I broke protocol to save his life, I made him too valuable to ignore and too dangerous to allow to live." "Meaning?" "Meaning Pascal realized that Benjamin Cross with a protector like me is someone who might actually be able to expose the network that killed his parents." Elizabeth's smile was sharp and dangerous. He's not wrong. Benjamin felt something cold and determined settling in his chest. For 8 years, he had been playing defense, building walls, protecting himself and his company through careful security and cautious business practices. But Elizabeth was right. Defense wasn't enough anymore. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need you to do what you do best. Use your technology, your resources, your analytical mind to help me identify Pascal's weaknesses." Elizabeth began typing on her tablet, bringing up surveillance footage, financial records, communication intercepts. "And then I need you to trust me to do what I do best, which is eliminate threats to people I love." Jennifer looked between them with growing understanding. "You're going to kill him." "I'm going to end this," Elizabeth corrected. "Pascal Kings, Michael Petrov. Whoever else is involved in threatening your family, They made this personal when they decided to use you as leverage against Benjamin. Elizabeth, Benjamin said quietly, understanding the magnitude of what she was proposing. If you do this, if we do this, there's no going back. No returning to your organization. No disappearing into new identities. I know. Elizabeth's brown eyes met his with absolute certainty. Benjamin, I told you last night that I was choosing you over everything else in my life. This is what that choice looks like. Before Benjamin could respond, Elizabeth's phone rang with an unknown number. She answered with professional caution, but her expression immediately hardened. Elizabeth Brick. Pascal Kings's voice carried smug satisfaction. I trust you received my message about Jennifer's vulnerability. I received it. Then you understand the situation. Benjamin walks away from Cross Security Technologies, signs over control to the board, and disappears. You go back to your shadow organization and forget you ever met him. Everyone lives. Elizabeth looked at Benjamin and saw her own determination reflected in his blue eyes. Counteroffer, Pascal. I'm listening. You and Michael Petrov and whoever else is involved in this network, you surrender yourselves to federal authorities. Confess to the murder of Benjamin's parents and spend the rest of your lives in prison. Everyone lives. Pascal's laugh was cold and calculating. Elizabeth, you're one woman, talented certainly, but ultimately expendable. I have resources you can't imagine. Connections that reach into government agencies and corporate boardrooms across 3 continents. You're right, Elizabeth said, her voice carrying calm that made experienced killers nervous. I am one woman, but I'm the woman Benjamin Cross loves, which means I'm fighting for something you'll never understand. And what's that? Family. Elizabeth's smile was visible in her voice. Pascal, you made a fundamental miscalculation. You assumed I was just another operative following orders. But I'm not protecting Benjamin because someone told me to. I'm protecting him because I choose to. Because he's mine, and his sister is mine, and his company is mine, and anyone who threatens them is threatening everything I have left to lose. Benjamin felt something overwhelming settle in his chest, pride and love and the recognition that he was listening to someone remarkable choose to fight for them instead of running from danger. You have 6 hours, Pascal said, his voice losing its cultured composure. 6 hours to convince Benjamin to cooperate, or Jennifer Cross dies and you get to watch. Pascal, Elizabeth said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded explosions. You just made the last mistake of your life. She disconnected the call and immediately began moving with renewed purpose, her hands flying across her tablet as she accessed systems that weren't supposed to exist. What are you doing? Benjamin asked. Ending this. Elizabeth's fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. Benjamin, I need access to Cross Security Technologies' most sophisticated surveillance systems. Every camera, every database, every piece of tracking technology you have. Elizabeth, that's military-grade equipment. Some of it is classified. Which is exactly what we need to find Pascal before he finds Jennifer. Elizabeth looked up from her tablet, and Benjamin saw something lethal and beautiful in her brown eyes. Benjamin, you wanted to know what happens when your technology combines with my training? We're about to find out. Jennifer watched them work with growing amazement. You're not just going to find him, are you? You're going to hunt him. We're going to do what should have been done 8 years ago. Benjamin said, his voice carrying grim determination. We're going to eliminate the threat to our family permanently. Elizabeth pulled up building schematics, financial records, travel patterns, creating a digital map of Pascal Kings's life that revealed vulnerabilities he didn't know he had. He's using the Meridian building as his base of operations, 40th floor, private offices, security that thinks it's impenetrable. Is it? Elizabeth's smile was sharp as a blade. Benjamin, I've spent 14 years getting into places that were supposed to be impossible to breach. Pascal's corporate fortress isn't even close to the most dangerous place I've infiltrated. What do you need from me? I need you to access the building systems remotely. Elevators, security cameras, fire suppression, everything. Give me complete control of Pascal's environment. Elizabeth began checking her weapons with methodical precision. And then I need you to trust me to go in alone. Absolutely not. Elizabeth looked up from her tactical preparations, and Benjamin saw something vulnerable flicker behind her professional composure. Benjamin, this is what I'm trained for. This is what I'm good at. Let me protect you the way you've been protecting everyone else for 8 years. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, her internal war visible in the tension around her eyes. Finally, she nodded. Together. But we do this my way, using my methods, following my tactical assessment. Always. As they prepared to leave Jennifer in the secure location Elizabeth had chosen, Benjamin's sister grabbed his arm with fingers that shook slightly despite her effort to appear calm. Ben, Jennifer said quietly, I love you, and I'm proud of you. Mom and Dad would be proud of you too. Benjamin hugged his sister with the fierce intensity of someone who understood this might be goodbye. We're going to end this, Jen, tonight, and then we're going to build the kind of life Mom and Dad wanted us to have. With her, Jennifer looked at Elizabeth with something that might have been approval. With her. Jennifer smiled despite the fear in her eyes. Good. She's terrifying, but she loves you. I can see it in the way she looks at you. Like you're the most important thing in the world. As they drove toward the Meridian building, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't experienced since she was 15 years old. The absolute certainty that some battles were worth fighting, some people were worth dying for, and some loves were strong enough to change the rules of engagement entirely. Benjamin, she said, as Manhattan's light spread out before them, like a constellation of possibilities. Whatever happens tonight, I need you to know something. What? For 14 years, I've been a weapon pointed at other people's targets. But with you, I finally understand what it means to be someone who chooses her own battles. Elizabeth's voice carried something that might have been peace. Thank you for that. Thank you for making me remember what it feels like to fight for something instead of just fighting to survive. Benjamin reached across the console to take her hand, understanding that they were driving toward a confrontation that would either save them both or destroy them completely. Elizabeth, whatever happens tonight, we face it together. Together, she agreed, her grip steady and strong and absolutely certain. The Meridian building rose before them like a monument to corporate power, its glass and steel facade reflecting the city lights in patterns that looked almost like stars. Somewhere in that building, Pascal Kings waited with the arrogance of someone who believed money and connections made him untouchable. He was about to learn that some things were more powerful than wealth, more dangerous than political influence, more unstoppable than professional assassins. He was about to meet Elizabeth Brick when she was fighting for love instead of duty. And that was something no amount of preparation could have made him ready for. The Meridian building's security system surrendered to Benjamin's digital assault with the efficiency of a lock recognizing its master's key. From their position in the parking garage, Benjamin's fingers moved across his laptop with the focused intensity of someone conducting a symphony of controlled destruction. Elevator controls are mine, Benjamin reported, his voice carrying grim satisfaction. Security cameras, fire suppression, emergency lighting, the entire building is now under our control. Elizabeth studied the building schematics on her tablet while checking her weapons for the third time. Pascal's office is on the 40th floor, northwest corner. Private elevator access, reinforced windows, only 2 entry points. How many guards? According to the building's security roster, 12 on the night shift, but Pascal's brought in additional assets. I count at least 6 more bodies that don't appear on any official records. Elizabeth's brown eyes met Benjamin's with practical certainty. Professional operators, probably former military or intelligence, 18 armed men between us and Pascal. 18 armed men who don't know they're trapped in a building we control, fighting someone who's been training for this kind of operation since she was 15 years old. Elizabeth's smile was sharp and dangerous, and completely without fear. Benjamin, those aren't bad odds. Those are target practice. They moved through the building's service entrance with the synchronized precision of partners who had learned to anticipate each other's movements. Elizabeth led with the fluid grace of someone who had turned stealth into art, while Benjamin provided digital support that made the building itself their ally. First checkpoint, Elizabeth whispered into her earpiece as they approached the service elevator. 2 guards, standard corporate security, no military training. Elevator arriving in 10 seconds, Benjamin replied from his position in the building security center, 3 floors below. I'm looping the camera feeds now. Elizabeth moved like smoke around the corner, her hands finding pressure points with surgical precision. Both guards collapsed without making a sound, their bodies settling to the floor with the quiet efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of non-lethal neutralization. Clear, she reported, dragging the unconscious men into a maintenance closet. Moving to phase 2. As they rode the service elevator toward the upper floors, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, protecting the person who mattered most in the world. Elizabeth, Benjamin said quietly, his voice carrying something that might have been awe. Watching you work, it's like watching someone who was born for this. I was born for a lot of things, Elizabeth replied, checking her tactical vest one final time. But I was reborn to protect you. The elevator opened onto the 38th floor, revealing a corridor that should have been empty, but wasn't. 3 men in dark suits waited with the patient alertness of predators who knew their prey was coming. Professional assets, Elizabeth confirmed, studying them through the elevator's security camera. Armed, trained, positioned to control the corridor. Pascal's taking this seriously. Can you handle 3 of them? Elizabeth's laugh was soft and dangerous. Benjamin, these men are good. But they're fighting for money. I'm fighting for love. There's no contest. She emerged from the elevator like a force of nature, moving with lethal grace that turned the corridor into a battlefield where she held every advantage. The first operative managed to draw his weapon before Elizabeth's hand found his throat. The second got off a single shot that went wide before her elbow connected with his solar plexus. The third actually managed to engage her in hand-to-hand combat for almost 15 seconds before joining his companions in unconsciousness. 38th floor clear, Elizabeth reported, not even breathing hard. Pascal's security is good, but not good enough. Elizabeth. Benjamin's voice carried something that might have been worry. My scans show multiple heat signatures converging on your position. They know you're in the building. Good. Let them come. Elizabeth began moving toward the stairwell with renewed purpose. The more resources Pascal commits to stopping me down here, the fewer he has protecting himself up there. As she climbed toward the 40th floor, Elizabeth felt her phone vibrate with an incoming call. She answered without breaking stride, recognizing Monica's encrypted number. Monica. Elizabeth, our satellite surveillance shows 18 hostile assets in that building, along with Pascal Kings and at least 2 other high-value targets. Monica's voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly how dangerous this situation had become. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and walking into a death trap. I know. Then you know you need to extract immediately. Monica. Elizabeth paused on the stairwell landing, looking up toward the floors that separated her from Pascal Kings. Do you remember what you told me the day you recruited me? When I was 15 years old and broken and covered in my family's blood? Elizabeth, you told me that some people are born to protect others, that some people have a gift for standing between innocent victims and the monsters who want to hurt them. Elizabeth's voice carried absolute certainty. You told me that my parents' death could either destroy me or transform me into someone who ensures other families never suffer the way mine did. Monica was quiet for a long moment. I remember. Benjamin's parents were murdered by the same kind of monsters who killed mine. His sister is threatened by the same kind of evil that destroyed my family when I was a child. Elizabeth began climbing again, her footsteps silent on the concrete stairs. Monica, this isn't just about love anymore. This is about becoming the person you trained me to be. Elizabeth, the organization taught me to protect strangers because duty demanded it. But you taught me to protect people because it's right, because some battles have to be fought, regardless of orders or politics or personal cost. Elizabeth's voice carried something that might have been peace. Tonight, I'm not Elizabeth Brick the operative. I'm Elizabeth the daughter who couldn't save her parents, fighting to save someone else's family. You know I can't officially support this. I know. Elizabeth reached the 39th floor and paused, checking her weapons one final time. But Monica, if you were 15 years old again, if you had the chance to save your family instead of just avenging them, wouldn't you take that chance, regardless of what it cost? Monica's silence was answer enough. 36 hours is now 32 hours, Monica said finally. After that, I can't protect you from the organization's response. I won't need 32 hours. Elizabeth's smile was visible in her voice, dangerous and determined and completely without doubt. This ends tonight. She disconnected the call and opened the stairwell door to the 40th floor, where Pascal Kings waited with the arrogance of someone who believed money and connections made him untouchable. The corridor was elegant corporate luxury, marble floors, expensive artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of Manhattan. But Elizabeth's trained eye saw past the facade to the tactical reality. Liveted cover, multiple sightlines, nowhere to hide if things went wrong. Benjamin, she whispered into her earpiece. I'm approaching Pascal's office. How many heat signatures in the target area? 5 in the main office, 2 more in the corridor outside. Benjamin's voice carried tension and pride in equal measure. Elizabeth, be careful. These aren't corporate security guards anymore. These are the same kind of people who killed my parents. Which is exactly why they're not going to kill anyone else tonight. Elizabeth moved down the corridor with predatory grace, every step calculated to avoid the pressure plates she could see embedded in the expensive carpeting. Pascal had turned his office into a fortress, but fortresses were only as strong as the people defending them. The 2 guards outside Pascal's office were professionals, military bearing, tactical positioning, weapons held with the casual competence of people who had used them many times before. Elizabeth studied them through her scope and felt something cold and determined settling in her chest. These men had stood in similar positions 8 years ago when Benjamin's parents died. They had followed orders, pulled triggers, eliminated threats to Pascal's network without conscience or hesitation. Tonight, they would learn what it felt like to be on the other side of someone else's mission. Elizabeth moved like smoke through the shadows, her approach so silent that the first guard didn't realize he was no longer alone until her hand closed around his throat. The second guard spun toward the sound of his partner collapsing, but Elizabeth was already moving, already inside his defensive perimeter, already ending his participation in Pascal's war. Corridor clear, she reported, checking both men for additional weapons and communication devices. Approaching target. Pascal King's office door was solid oak reinforced with steel plating, the kind of barrier that was designed to stop bullets and explosives. But Elizabeth hadn't survived 14 years in the world's most dangerous places by accepting barriers as permanent obstacles. Benjamin, I need you to trigger the fire suppression system in Pascal's office. All of it. Sprinklers, emergency lighting, ventilation shutdown. Elizabeth, that will flood the electronics, disable the security systems. That's the point. Pascal's advantage is technology and superior positioning. Take that away, and he's just another frightened man who's run out of places to hide. Benjamin's finger moved across his keyboard with surgical precision, and within seconds, the building's fire suppression system responded to phantom sensors that reported a blaze on the 40th floor. Emergency lighting bathed the corridor in red. Sprinklers began flooding Pascal's office with thousands of gallons of water, and the ventilation system shut down with the mechanical precision of safety protocols overriding human preference. System activated, Benjamin reported. Elizabeth, you've got maybe 10 minutes before building security realizes this is a false alarm. 10 minutes is 9 more than I need. Elizabeth placed shaped charges against the office door's hinges with the methodical efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. The explosions were precisely controlled, designed to eliminate the barrier without bringing down the building. And when the smoke cleared, Pascal King's fortress had become accessible. She entered the office like an avenging angel, water cascading from the ceiling, emergency lighting painting everything in shades of red and shadow. Pascal stood behind his massive desk with 3 remaining guards, his expensive suit soaked, his carefully styled silver hair plastered to his skull, his expression carrying the first real fear she had seen from him. "Elizabeth Brick," Pascal said, his cultured voice carrying forced calm. "Impressive entrance. But you're still outnumbered." "Am I?" Elizabeth's smile was sharp as a blade, beautiful and deadly and completely without mercy. "Pascal, you made a fundamental miscalculation. You assumed I was just another operative following orders. Aren't you? I'm a woman in love, fighting to protect her family." Elizabeth began moving through the office with predatory grace, her weapon trained on Pascal, while her peripheral vision tracked his guard's positioning. "Do you know what that makes me? Desperate? Unstoppable." The firefight that followed was brief, brutal, and completely one-sided. Elizabeth moved through Pascal's guards like water around stones, her years of training combining with desperate love to create something more dangerous than any weapon Pascal could buy. Within 90 seconds, his professional protection lay unconscious on his soaked carpet, and Pascal King stood alone with the woman who had come to end his war. "You can't kill me," Pascal said, his voice carrying the desperate authority of someone who had never been truly powerless. "I have connections, resources, people who will hunt you down if anything happens to me." "You're right," Elizabeth said, lowering her weapon slightly. "I can't kill you, but I can do something much worse." "Which is?" Elizabeth pulled out her phone and began recording video, the camera capturing Pascal's soaked, defeated appearance with digital precision. "I can make you confess. I can record your admission of guilt in the murder of Benjamin's parents, your confession about the network of buyers and sellers who trade in military technology, your acknowledgement of every crime you've committed over the past decade." "I'll never." "You will." Elizabeth's voice carried absolute certainty. "Because the alternative is that Benjamin Cross releases every piece of evidence we've gathered about your network to federal authorities, international courts, and investigative journalists simultaneously. And then you get to spend whatever time you have left running from people who don't appreciate exposure." Pascal stared at her with growing understanding of how completely his situation had changed. "What do you want?" "I want you to end this. I want you to confess, cooperate with authorities, and ensure that Benjamin and his family are never threatened again." Elizabeth moved closer, and Pascal saw something lethal and beautiful in her brown eyes. "And I want you to understand that if you ever threaten someone I love again, I will finish what we started tonight." Before Pascal could respond, the office doors opened to reveal Benjamin Cross. Water streaming from his hair, his expensive suit ruined, his blue eyes blazing with something that looked like divine retribution. "Pascal," Benjamin said, his voice carrying 8 years of suppressed rage and grief. "Let's talk about what happened to my parents." Elizabeth felt something shift in her chest as she watched Benjamin confront the man who had orchestrated his family's destruction. This wasn't just about ending a threat anymore. This was about justice, closure, the kind of healing that could only come from facing monsters instead of running from them. "Benjamin, you don't understand," Pascal started, but Benjamin's laugh cut him off. "I understand perfectly. I understand that you've been planning to steal my company since the day my parents died. I understand that you've been waiting 8 years for the right moment to eliminate the last obstacle to complete control." Benjamin moved closer to Pascal, and Elizabeth saw something magnificent in his bearing. Not just anger, but righteous purpose. "What I don't understand is how you thought you could threaten my sister and the woman I love and expect to survive the consequences." Pascal looked between them with growing recognition of how fundamentally he had miscalculated. "You're just a CEO and a bodyguard. You can't destroy my entire network." "Watch us," Elizabeth said simply. Benjamin pulled out his tablet and began uploading files with the casual efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this moment for months. Financial records linking you to weapons buyers. Communication intercepts proving your coordination with overseas clients. Evidence connecting you to my parents' murder and 24 other eliminations over the past decade. You can't prove. We already have. Elizabeth's smile was sharp and satisfied and completely without mercy. Benjamin's technology identified your network's communication patterns. My organization's resources confirm the connections. Together, we've built a case that will either put you in prison for life or get you killed by the same buyers who trusted you to keep their secrets." Pascal King sank into his water-soaked chair with the expression of someone watching his entire world collapse. "What do you want?" "Justice," Benjamin said simply. "For my parents, for every innocent person your network has hurt, for every family that's been destroyed by your greed." "And protection," Elizabeth added. "A guarantee that Benjamin, Jennifer, and anyone connected to them will never be threatened again." "And if I refuse?" Elizabeth and Benjamin exchanged a look that communicated volumes without words. Partners who had learned to anticipate each other's thoughts. Lovers who had chosen to fight for each other regardless of the cost. "Then you deal with the consequences of declaring war on people who love each other enough to burn down the world to keep each other safe," Elizabeth said, her voice carrying promise and threat in equal measure. As federal agents began arriving in response to Benjamin's carefully timed call to authorities, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't experienced since she was 15 years old. The absolute certainty that justice was possible, that monsters could be defeated, that some battles were worth fighting regardless of personal cost. Pascal Kings was led away in handcuffs, his network exposed, his resources seized, his ability to threaten innocent families permanently eliminated. And in the wreckage of his soaked office, Benjamin Cross and Elizabeth Brick stood together as partners who had chosen love over safety, justice over survival, each other over everything else the world had to offer. "Is it over?" Benjamin asked, watching the last of Pascal's associates being taken into custody. "It's over," Elizabeth confirmed, feeling something like peace settling in her chest. "For the first time in 14 years. Benjamin, your family is safe. Your parents are avenged. Pascal's network is destroyed. And us?" Elizabeth looked at the man who had made her remember what it felt like to fight for something instead of just fighting to survive. The man who had chosen her over his empire, over his safety, over everything he had built in 8 years of careful survival. "Us," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him softly, thoroughly, like a promise and a prayer combined, "is just beginning." 3 weeks later, Elizabeth Brick stood in the conference room of Cross Security Technologies, watching Manhattan spread out below through floor-to-ceiling windows that no longer felt like targets waiting to be shattered. The bullet holes from that first assassination attempt had been repaired, the office restored to its original elegance. But something fundamental had changed in the space where her life had intersected with Benjamin's. She was no longer a ghost haunting the shadows of other people's lives. She was home. "The Senate Intelligence Committee wants to debrief you personally about Pascal's network," Benjamin said, entering the conference room with 2 cups of coffee and the kind of smile that still made her breath catch. "Apparently, the information you provided has led to 17 arrests across 4 countries. "Good." Elizabeth accepted the coffee with hands that no longer trembled when someone approached unexpectedly. Those families Pascal destroyed deserved justice. The weapons buyers he connected deserved exposure. Benjamin moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could feel his warmth, solid and reassuring, and completely without the hyper-vigilant alertness that had defined her existence for 14 years. "Any word for Monica?" she called this morning. Elizabeth's smile carried something that might have been peace. "The organization has officially approved my new status as an independent contractor. Apparently, taking down an international weapons trafficking network, single-handedly, impressed even the people who trained me." "Single-handedly?" Elizabeth turned to face him, and Benjamin saw in her brown eyes the same love that had convinced her to risk everything for a man she barely knew. "Benjamin Cross, you accessed a 40-story building's security systems from a laptop and turned corporate architecture into a tactical advantage. You coordinated with federal authorities to ensure Pascal's entire network was arrested simultaneously. You risked your company, your freedom, your life to protect your family. We did all that." "Yes." Elizabeth moved closer, eliminating the space between them with the unconscious grace of someone who no longer feared emotional proximity. "We did. Together. The way we're going to do everything else for the rest of our lives." Benjamin set down his coffee and framed her face with hands that had learned gentleness instead of just strength. Elizabeth, are you sure about this? About us? About staying? About building something real instead of disappearing into your next assignment? Benjamin, Elizabeth's voice carried absolute certainty. For 14 years, I've been Elizabeth Brick, the operative, the weapon, the asset deployed to protect strangers. But with you, I'm just Elizabeth, the woman who chooses her own battles, who fights for love instead of duty, who finally understands what it means to have something worth protecting. And what's that? A family, a home, a future that isn't defined by survival, but by the possibility of happiness. Elizabeth rose on her toes to kiss him softly, thoroughly, like a promise renewed every day. Benjamin, you didn't just save my life. You gave me a life worth saving. Before Benjamin could respond, the conference room door opened to reveal Jennifer Cross, her arms full of art museum exhibition catalogs, and her face bright with the kind of happiness that came from seeing her brother finally, truly content. Sorry to interrupt, Jennifer said, though her smile suggested she wasn't sorry at all. But Detective Morgan is here with the final reports on Pascal's case. Detective Courtney Morgan entered behind Jennifer, carrying a thick file and the expression of someone who had spent 20 years in law enforcement without ever seeing a case quite like this one. Mr. Cross, Miss Brick, I thought you'd want to know that Pascal Kings pled guilty to all charges this morning. All of them? Benjamin asked. Murder, conspiracy, weapons trafficking, racketeering, the list goes on for 6 pages. Detective Morgan set the file on the conference table with satisfaction. Between his confession and the evidence he provided, the prosecution had enough to put him away for life without the possibility of parole. Elizabeth felt something she hadn't experienced since she was 15 years old. The absolute certainty that justice was possible, that monsters could be defeated, that sometimes the good people actually won. What about his network? She asked. Dismantled. 17 arrests, as Benjamin mentioned, but also seizures of assets worth approximately $200 million. Disruption of weapons sales to 3 terrorist organizations and exposure of corruption in 2 government agencies. Detective Morgan's smile carried grim satisfaction. Pascal Kings built his network over 20 years. You destroyed it in 3 weeks. We destroyed it, Benjamin corrected, his arm settling around Elizabeth's waist with the casual possession of someone who no longer feared losing the person he loved. Detective, Elizabeth's role in this is classified at levels that don't officially exist, Detective Morgan finished. As far as any public record shows, Pascal Kings was brought down by brilliant investigative work from Cross Security Technologies and anonymous tips from concerned citizens. Elizabeth nodded her appreciation. Even in her new life, some secrets were necessary, some protections required. But for the first time in 14 years, she was keeping secrets to protect something she had built, rather than something she was trying to survive. There is one more thing, Detective Morgan said, pulling a smaller envelope from her jacket. This was found in Pascal's office safe. It's addressed to Benjamin Cross, dated 8 years ago. Benjamin's hands shook slightly as he opened the envelope, and Elizabeth moved closer, offering silent support as he unfolded a letter written in his father's distinctive handwriting. Benjamin, if you're reading this, it means the worst has happened and your mother and I are gone. It also means that someone has finally had the courage to investigate Pascal Kings and the network he's been building within our company. Son, we've known for months that Pascal was connected to buyers who wanted to turn our security technology into weapons. We've known that refusing to cooperate would put us in danger. But some principles are worth dying for, and some legacies are worth preserving, even at the cost of our lives. We chose to fight rather than compromise. We chose to protect the innocent rather than profit from their suffering. We chose to leave you a company that creates safety instead of destruction, even knowing what that choice might cost. Benjamin, you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and more capable of protecting others than we ever dared to hope. Build the life we dreamed of for you. Find someone who understands what it costs to care too much. Love completely, fight fiercely, and never apologize for choosing what's right over what's profitable. We love you and Jennifer more than words can express. Make us proud. Your father, David Cross Benjamin, finished reading with tears streaming down his face. 8 years of guilt and self-doubt dissolving under the weight of his father's final words. Elizabeth held him as he grieved, as he finally allowed himself to feel the loss he had been carrying alone for so long. They would be proud, Elizabeth said softly, her own voice thick with emotion. Benjamin, what we did, what we built together. Your parents would be proud of the man you've become. They would love you, Jennifer added, moving to embrace both of them with the fierce affection of someone who had found her family, expanded, rather than threatened by her brother's love. Elizabeth, they would love you for making Benjamin remember how to be happy. Detective Morgan quietly excused herself, understanding that some moments were too private for official observation. When the three of them were alone, Elizabeth felt something she had never experienced before. The simple, overwhelming joy of belonging somewhere, of being claimed by people who chose to love her despite knowing exactly how dangerous she was. So what happens now? Jennifer asked, settling into one of the conference room chairs with the casual comfort of someone who no longer feared for her family's safety. Now we rebuild, Benjamin said, his voice carrying strength and certainty despite the tears still wet on his cheeks. Cross-Security Technologies becomes what Mom and Dad always intended, a company that protects people instead of enabling their destruction. And personally, Jennifer's smile was knowing, mischievous, completely lacking in subtlety. Elizabeth and Benjamin exchanged a look that communicated volumes. Shared secrets, shared purpose, shared love that had survived assassination attempts and organizational ultimatums, and the kind of impossible choices that destroyed most relationships before they began. Personally, Elizabeth said, her brown eyes bright with something that looked suspiciously like mischief. We're going to find out what it's like to build a life together when we're not running from people who want to kill us. Sounds boring, Jennifer said with a grin. Sounds perfect, Benjamin corrected, pulling Elizabeth closer against his side. Elizabeth, for 8 years I've been surviving instead of living, building walls instead of relationships, protecting everyone except the parts of myself that needed protection most. And now I have a partner who understands that some things are worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. Benjamin's voice carried wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe that someone like Elizabeth had chosen someone like him. Now I have someone who makes me want to be the man my parents raised me to be, instead of the man their death turned me into. Elizabeth felt tears burning behind her eyes, not the tears of grief she had shed for 14 years, but tears of joy, of gratitude, of overwhelming love, for the man who had seen past her walls, to the woman hidden beneath layers of training and fear. Benjamin, she said softly, you saved me, not just from Pascal, not just from the life I was living, but from the person I was becoming. You reminded me that protecting people because you care about them is different from protecting people because you're ordered to. How? Because when you love someone, protecting them becomes a privilege instead of a duty. Because when you have something worth losing, you finally understand what it means to fight for something, instead of just fighting to survive. Jennifer wiped her own eyes with the back of her hand, watching her brother and the woman who had become family discover what it meant to choose each other every day instead of just in moments of crisis. You know, Jennifer said, her voice carrying the kind of happiness that came from seeing people you love find their place in the world. Mom used to say that the best relationships were partnerships where each person made the other stronger, braver, more themselves than they could ever be alone. She was right, Elizabeth said, understanding that she was being welcomed not just into Benjamin's life, but into a family legacy of love and protection, and choosing what was right over what was easy. As the afternoon sun painted the conference room in golden light, Elizabeth felt something she had never experienced before, the absolute certainty that tomorrow would be better than today, that the future held possibilities instead of just threats, that some loves were strong enough to transform not just the people who shared them, but the entire world around them. So what's our first project? She asked. settling into Benjamin's embrace with the contentment of someone who had finally found home. "Our first project," Benjamin said, his voice carrying the confidence that had built an empire, but now focused on building something infinitely more valuable, "is learning how to be happy, learning how to wake up every morning grateful for what we have instead of afraid of what we might lose. That's going to take some practice," Elizabeth admitted. 14 years of survival instincts don't disappear overnight. "Then we'll practice together." Benjamin pressed a kiss to her hair, breathing in the scent of jasmine that would forever remind him of the night she had saved his life and stolen his heart. "We'll practice being partners instead of protectors, lovers instead of allies, people who choose each other every day because we want to, not because we have to." "And our second project?" Benjamin's smile carried the kind of mischief that reminded Elizabeth why she had fallen in love with a man who could access 40-story buildings from a laptop and coordinate federal raids while remaining calm enough to make her coffee exactly the way she liked it. "Our second project," he said, "is revolutionizing the security industry, combining your field expertise with my technology to create protection services for people who need them most. Not just wealthy CEOs and government officials, but families like ours were, people who deserve to be safe from monsters like Pascal." Elizabeth felt something magnificent unfurling in her chest. Purpose and love and the recognition that she could use every skill she had learned in service of something beautiful instead of just something necessary. "A security company run by people who understand what it costs to care too much," she said, her voice carrying excitement and possibility and absolute certainty. "Exactly. Elizabeth Brick and Benjamin Cross, partners in business and life, making the world safer for people who deserve protection but can't afford the kind of resources we have access to." Jennifer laughed with pure delight. "You two are going to change everything, aren't you?" "We're going to try," Elizabeth said, looking at Benjamin with something that might have been destiny recognition. "We're going to use everything Pascal's network taught us about how evil operates, and we're going to build something better. Something that protects families instead of destroying them," Benjamin agreed. "Something that honors what my parents died trying to create." As evening settled over Manhattan, painting the city in shades of gold and possibility, Elizabeth Brick and Benjamin Cross began planning a future that neither could have imagined 3 weeks earlier. The conference room table was now covered with architectural plans, security protocols, and business proposals that represented something revolutionary. A protection service designed for people who needed help but couldn't afford traditional private security. "Look at this," Elizabeth said, pointing to a detailed plan for mobile security units that could respond to domestic violence situations within minutes. "We could partner with women's shelters, provide protection during the most dangerous transition periods when victims are leaving abusive relationships." Benjamin studied the proposal with the same analytical intensity he had once reserved for corporate acquisitions. "The technology exists to create panic buttons that would immediately alert our response teams and local law enforcement simultaneously. GPS tracking, audio recording, real-time threat assessment. We could save lives. And this," Jennifer added, spreading out another set of documents across the table. "Educational programs for schools in high-crime areas. Teaching children basic safety awareness without traumatizing them. Giving teachers protocols for identifying and responding to threats." Elizabeth felt something magnificent building in her chest as she looked at the plans spread before them. For 14 years, she had been a weapon pointed at other people's targets, protecting individuals, while never addressing the systems that created danger in the first place. But this was different. This was prevention instead of just reaction, protection instead of just revenge. "We could change everything," she said softly, her voice carrying wonder at the scope of what they were proposing. "Not just protect wealthy executives from corporate rivals, but actually make communities safer for the people who need it most." "The people my parents would have wanted us to help," Benjamin agreed, his father's letter still fresh in his mind. "Elizabeth, what you know about threat assessment. What you've learned about how predators think and operate, combined with technology that can predict and prevent instead of just respond, we could save thousands of lives. Elizabeth moved to the window, looking out at the city where millions of people went to sleep every night, hoping they would wake up safe, hoping their families would be protected, hoping someone cared enough to stand between them and the monsters that haunted their worst nightmares. "There's something else," she said, turning back to face Benjamin and Jennifer. "Something I haven't told you about my time with the organization." Benjamin moved closer, recognizing the tone in her voice that suggested she was about to share something significant. "What is it?" "We weren't just individual operatives working separate assignments. We were part of a network. Dozens of women like me, all recruited as teenagers after traumatic losses, all trained to protect others because we understood what it felt like to be victims." Elizabeth's voice carried the weight of years spent in shadows. Most of them are still trapped in that life, still following orders, still believing that duty is the only thing that gives their existence meaning. "You want to help them," Jennifer said, understanding immediately where Elizabeth's thoughts were leading. "I want to offer them what Benjamin offered me, a choice, a chance to use their skills for something they choose instead of something they're ordered to do." Elizabeth's brown eyes blazed with passionate certainty. "Jennifer, there are women out there who have spent years learning how to save other people, but have never learned how to save themselves." Benjamin felt his love for Elizabeth deepen as he watched her transform the pain of her past into purpose for the future. "You're talking about recruiting them, building a team of protectors who understand victimization from the inside." "I'm talking about building a family," Elizabeth corrected. "A family of people who choose each other, who protect each other, who use their darkest experiences to ensure other families never have to suffer the way we did." The vision that emerged over the next hour was breathtaking in its scope and ambition. Cross-security technologies would become more than a company. It would become a movement, a network of protectors who understood trauma, who had survived the worst humanity could offer, who had chosen to transform their pain into purpose. "We'll need facilities," Benjamin said, his mind already calculating logistics and resources. "Training centers, safe houses, communication networks that can't be compromised by hostile organizations." "We'll need legal frameworks," Jennifer added, her museum experience with grant writing and nonprofit structures proving unexpectedly valuable. "Ways to operate across state lines, partnerships with law enforcement agencies, protocols for working with existing social services. And we'll need funding," Elizabeth said, though her smile suggested she had ideas about that as well. "Fortunately, Pascal King's seized assets are being distributed to victims of his network. I suspect some of those victims might be interested in supporting an organization dedicated to preventing others from suffering the way they did." Benjamin laughed with pure delight at the poetic justice of using Pascal's stolen wealth to fund the very kind of protection services he had tried to destroy. "Elizabeth Brick, you are absolutely brilliant." "I learned from the best," she replied, moving into his arms with the fluid grace that still made his breath catch. "Benjamin, what we're building here, it's bigger than us. It's bigger than revenge or justice or even love." "What is it?" "It's hope." Elizabeth's voice carried the kind of certainty that moved mountains and changed worlds. "It's proof that good people can win, that love is stronger than fear, that some things are worth fighting for regardless of personal cost." As they worked late into the evening, refining plans and building dreams, Elizabeth felt something she had never experienced before, the absolute certainty that her life had meaning beyond survival, beyond duty, beyond the careful distance she had maintained from the world for 14 years. She was no longer Elizabeth Brick, the operative, the asset, the weapon deployed to protect strangers. She was Elizabeth Cross. She had decided to take Benjamin's name, to claim the family that had claimed her, to build something permanent instead of just surviving until the next assignment. They were no longer a CEO and an operative, thrown together by circumstance and assassination attempts. They were partners who had chosen each other through every test that love could face. They were protectors who understood that some battles were worth fighting regardless of personal cost. They were two people who had learned that the strongest walls were the ones you built around the people you loved, not the ones you built around your heart. And in the conference room where their story had begun, with shattered glass and whispered promises, they began writing the next chapter of a love story that had transformed them both from survivors into people who finally understood what it meant to live. Outside their windows, the city that had witnessed their first meeting sparkled with lights that looked like stars, like promises, like the beginning of everything they had never dared to hope for, but had somehow found in each other. Some love stories begin with fairy tale meetings in perfect circumstances. Others begin with bullets and blood and desperate choices made by people who understand that saving someone else is sometimes the only way to save yourself. Elizabeth and Benjamin's love story had begun with broken glass and ended with broken barriers, with walls that crumbled under the weight of something stronger than fear. With two people who had learned that the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't assassins or weapons trafficking networks or international conspiracies. The most dangerous thing in the world was love that was strong enough to change everything, brave enough to risk everything, and true enough to transform two people who had spent years surviving into two people who finally understood what it meant to live. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of love, danger, and transformation. Elizabeth and Benjamin's story shows us that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships create the strongest foundations for lasting love. Have you ever found strength you didn't know you had when fighting for someone you care about? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for tomorrow's passionate tale of hearts that refuse to give up on love, no matter what obstacles stand in their way. Always remember that some battles are worth fighting, some people are worth risking everything for, and some loves are strong enough to change the world.